how to develop your team might be just as important as how to develop your game. 9 years in varying roles in game development and a passion to educate has brought our next speaker around the world and eventually here to Konsoll. So please welcome Dan Cox.
So now I just need to plug this in. It's okay for me to do that now, right? All right. Go. Oh, of course it shut off right now. Perfect. There we go. Just give me half an hour. There we go. Of course. Oh, do I need to? Oh. All right, forgive me. This didn't jump in the way that I was hoping. Let's just take a while to set that up to show how professional I am. There we go. And can't see my mouse. I bet you can. It's probably very big. There we go, presenter view. There. And we did it. No, you can see, yay, yeah, well, let's be happy for it anyways. Let's just make sure. I'd prefer there not to be a banner there, but we got what we got. All right, hi. This is 0 to 60, Supercharging Your Juniors. I do want to point out just at the outset that this is an artist's perspective on hiring juniors. How many people here are artists? How many people here are programmers? How many people here are neither one of those? Okay, cool. So this is an artist's perspective. It looks like it's about 50-50, which is nice. So the fact of the matter is this can work for either person. For programmers, if you're hiring juniors, or artists, if you're hiring juniors, this should be applicable for both, but caveat, it is an artist's perspective, so there may be differences in certain sort of elements of it. So I do want to be clear about that. So basically, I'm Dan Cox. Oh, and it did go full screen, good. I work at Capybara Games. Currently, I'm working on a game called Below. And juniors, so this is what we're here for. A lot of times I see people talk about juniors in a way of, what should juniors do, people new to the industry? What should they do to succeed, to get a job, to be the best in the job? But we don't often talk about what we need to do as people with experience to make sure that any kind of new person we bring onto the team is going to succeed as well as possible. A lot of times we just put the onus on them. And that can work, but it's not always the best way to kind of pull off the best things that we want from bringing on new people onto the team. So the first thing we kind of got to deal with is like, why would you want a junior? Well, some of the simple ones, some of the basic pros of hiring a junior artist or a junior programmer, somebody new who has very little experience. They're cheap. From a practical matter, they don't cost as much because there's a number of risks involved, but they're passionate. That passion is hugely beneficial to your team to bring on. They also have a lack of ego, which you can get from more senior people, because they don't necessarily know what they need or what should be there, and so they haven't established some of those ideas, and that lack of ego is very, very useful when you're trying to get a team going. But obviously, there are risks. Basically, the junior cons that you run into is that they have some poor production practices, such as if any of you here are brand new, you often may not know how to name things correctly for game development. So those problems can be a real production issue. As well, if you've only got a team of juniors, their practices for backing up their assets can be much more lackluster and cause some problems where you can lose work really, really easily. Anybody who's started out, who didn't back their stuff up, who lost it when a computer crashed, know that that sucks. Also, they need oversight. A lot of times, you may have a junior who just needs close attention, and that takes time away from you. So that can be a bit of a risk. They also require solutions where a more senior person has already figured out how some of these things should be made. But our goal here is to increase the positives that you get from hiring a junior and reducing the risks that are inherent with that. But why does this matter to me at all? Like, why do I care? Well, the fact of the matter is I've been teaching game art at Seneca College for about 8 years now, more than even, and I've taught over 300 students. And it's really, really important to me because I like all these goofballs. The fact of the matter is helping these students go from knowing nothing about 3D art to being rather quite professional is really, really compelling to me. These students actually came in with zero experience in game development at all, even a little experience in art a lot of times, and went from zero to, in 8 months, this quality of work. This was a group project. I'm very, very proud of what our students have consistently produced over the years. These are all just different group projects. Always 8 months. So for me, being able to see somebody go from absolutely knowing nothing to being skilled and competent as quickly as possible is something that's really, really close to my heart. Because I want to make sure that these guys can understand how to build up that skill set and minimizing some of the confusion and problems that we can easily run into. All of the studios that I've worked at, we've pretty much always tried to bring on junior artists. Pseudo Interactive, I was the junior that they brought on, and the way that I was helped there meant a lot to me. And every kind of person that I've brought onto a team, I've always tried to make sure that I handle things in certain ways. And the way that I've learned how to handle it has certainly changed over the years. I've basically spent my career making the most of newcomers, and it's been absolutely fantastic. I've learned myself so much from it, and I believe that that's what juniors can bring to a team who may even feel that they don't need one or are too senior. So, let's say you want a junior. Well, you want to hire somebody new to the industry. When should you get one? Well, there's a couple factors. First off, being production needs, what you need in your production, and your team size. So how does that kind of pan out? Well, production needs is basically whether you need a junior, the seniors, dawn of justice. There we go. I love saying a joke before it shows up. Basically, we need to compare the two. So what's going to happen when you're going to hire a senior or versus a junior? Well, again, let's compare. So juniors, they're cheap, but they need answers. You need to provide them with what they need to do and how they're going to do it. And they cost time in the short term because you're going to need to give some oversight and help them out. But they're passionate and malleable. So when they come onto a team, if you have some practices that are maybe not quite figured out or that you need somebody to do something specific, a lot of juniors are much more accepting to doing that. Whereas with seniors, you're in a situation where they're expensive, but they're independent and resourceful a lot of times. And they create time for you. If you're in a process where you don't quite know what you need to do, they will give you time by just knowing how to handle it. But sometimes they can be pretty egotistical and inflexible because they've done things before. They feel like they know how to do it. They feel like they know how things should be done. And if you're doing it differently, there's a number of times where you can get a senior who's just doesn't want to do it that way and just wants it to be done their way. And that can be a problem. So the thing is you hire a senior when you need results right away, but you hire a junior when you want to grow in some way. So, as well, team size. If you've got a team, big team, then you have less risk in hiring a junior. That's because if we have on one scale, risk going up, and on one scale, we've got your mentoring team size from small to large. Basically, when you start off with a very, very small team of mentors, your risk is relatively high. But as that team gets bigger and bigger, your risk kind of goes down. So for a place like Ubisoft, for example, they can hire a junior at very, very low risk because they've got enough people to train and mentor and explain to them how to do things. Whereas for a very, very small team, that risk of hiring a junior becomes that much more risky. So you can't forget, though, that your team needs to want to teach them. If you try to hire a junior and you expect your team to teach them and the team's simply saying, I don't want to, I just want to make art, I just want to program, then you're still going to run into a problem. So the team needs to want to teach to be able to successfully hire a junior if your team's really small. So basically, hire a junior when you have people to lead and guide them, when you have a clear picture of what you're doing and how to make it, and when you need cheaper labor. Everybody does sometimes. It's a good time to hire a junior in those cases. A senior you need to hire when you're still figuring out your process and style, because they can help do that, when you need creative problem solving, and when you don't have time to help them. So first off, hiring. You need to bring somebody on, you want to do that. Well, we got to figure out what the process for that is. First, you need to find, then pick, then interview. So find means we need to find who it is that we're going to work with. You need to get somebody applying. You need to get a junior. How do you do that? Well, the easiest way is have a lot of studio notoriety. Blizzard, for example, is a huge, super, super well-known studio. And the fact of the matter is, if they want a junior, they just say on like Twitter even, we want to hire a junior. And they're going to get a million people easily within seconds applying with their portfolios, with their work. So it's very easy for Blizzard to find a junior artist to hire because their notoriety is just worldwide. For a small studio who's not very well known, you may not be getting consistent applications of people new to the industry who want to get a job. So if you can build your notoriety, or at least build your notoriety in circles of juniors, you're gonna get more applicants. More applicants means you can pick from the better ones quicker. But notoriety is hard to build. It's hard to get out there and have people notice you right away. So some of the other things that you can do is simply go to schools. The fact of the matter is, there's a number of schools, it seems here. There may be varying quality of students there. There may be a number of different things. But if you go to the schools, you can meet the students. You can meet some people who you find out are actually super good at what they're doing. And by actually talking to them, you can start to let them know who you are. So subsequent years of students will often talk to each other and go, hey, we had this studio come in. We really liked them. And the new people will go, oh, wow, like I might apply to them. That is an incredibly useful thing to do. As well, you can have those students, you can just look at their work, and you can find out, hey, you're actually super good, and nobody else in the industry is aware of it yet. Hey, do you want a job right now? And that is incredibly useful, both for the student and for yourself. Because a lot of times, some really top-notch students just really don't get out there very well. They don't make their name known, they don't apply to places because they're too scared and they're too nervous. But if you're able to meet them right away, early on, you're able to get in on the ground floor of somebody who is very skilled despite just being nervous and not getting their name out there. Also, update your website. If you have one, update your website with your job postings. If you don't have job postings, people will not apply. So if you're sitting there and you're wondering, well, I don't get any applications from junior artists, I don't get any applications from new people, the way to fix that is to make it clear on your website. I have had so many students be very, very scared of applying to a studio because they don't want to give the wrong impression. If the website doesn't say we're looking for somebody, then a lot of times they won't apply out of just straight fear. Because they'll think, if I apply and it doesn't say that they're looking for anybody, they'll think I'm a jerk. And that's not necessarily the case. Maybe you feel like they're jerks, but I suspect most of the time my experience is that you don't. So post on your website either clearly that you are looking for somebody, because you'll get something, you'll get applications, you can do whatever you want with them, obviously, at that point. But the students will apply. Also, if you're not looking for anybody, but you would just like a constant influx of applications because they're useful to have, then you can go, okay, hey, we're not looking for anybody necessarily at the moment, but we always want to see good work. And we're always interested in talented people. Put that on your website, that kind of leaves the door open, at least for some juniors, to apply when they might have been too scared to do otherwise. So next, you need to pick. So picking means looking through that list of people and figuring out who it is you actually want to hire. So you really want to kind of figure out the choice of who you're going to pick, who you're going to potentially step forward with, who you're going to interview and talk to more. Obviously, the first thing you have to look through is their portfolio, either for a programmer, work that they've done before, or see some code and try to figure out, like, are they doing the kinds of things that we need them to do? Because their experience is, in general, non-existent. You need to look at the work that they produce. So if they're going to school, you need to ask yourself, well, what work have they produced outside of school? What work have they produced in school? And of what quality level is it? This seems relatively obvious, because that's the only thing you really have to judge. If you look at their resume and it's full of stuff that you don't necessarily care for, it doesn't necessarily matter because it's the work. So things you want to look for is how relevant is the work that they have in their portfolio. The more applications you get, the more concerned you can be about the relevance of the work. So for example, if you're doing a very, very stylized cartoony game, ideally, your ideal applicant would have the same kind of artwork in their portfolio. If they're making super hyper-realistic work, then you do run the risk of hiring them and they go, I don't really want to work on stylized stuff. And that's a problem. So your ideal situation is that they're working within the same kind of style and that they're doing the same kind of things that you want. Then you're really just reducing risk. But if those things don't quite match up, then you have to start figuring out how you're going to step forward with that, how you're going to kind of change that. I also recommend, if the student has been, and I am referring to students a lot in this case, if the person has been out of school or has not produced work for their portfolio for a long period of time, that's also of note as well. I've had a number of students who do not update their portfolio. Actually, out of curiosity, how many students are here, or people who have maybe just left school or are brand new? A couple? A little bit? Oh, the hands are barely going up for that one. And that's fine. Keep this in mind for yourself as well. I constantly tell my students that as soon as they've graduated, continue making work and update that portfolio as often as possible. Because the same for you, if you're looking for a junior, you want to see what they're doing outside of school. Because during that time, a person is forced to make art. Otherwise, they get in trouble and fail. So if they're not doing it for themselves, if they're not doing it in their spare time at all, then that does suggest that there's potentially less of an interest in doing it, that they're only doing it when forced. Again, that's okay. If you're in a situation in which you can't make more art than that, that's okay. But as a person looking at that portfolio, do keep in mind what they've done in that in-between, because that in-between time is a big boost, in my opinion. It shows that they are also very excited about doing this work. And honestly, that is where you'll see a lot of the biggest gain in learning. Also, your biases. One thing you want to be aware of, though, is when you're hiring somebody that you're not just trying to hire yourself. Because you're not the best. None of us are. I'm not. I should not be hiring the same kind of person that is the exact same way as me. Because that means I'm only going to get like another smaller version of me or something. That's not that great. That's just doubling up a little bit. What you want is someone who's going to change the way you do things, is going to potentially end up challenging your notions of what you should do. That makes you better. That improves the things that we make. So if you simply try to go, well, when I was applying, I had a portfolio of like 50 things. Yeah, but were they bad? Maybe you were wrong at that point of time in your career, and you were a bit blindsided. Don't necessarily get caught up in the exact things you think are the important parts. Focus on what you actually need. If you need somebody who does the same kind of art that you're making, focus on that when you're looking at applications. And don't necessarily get caught up in, well, they have a typo in their resume. Fail. Because I've seen people that do that, and it's short-sighted, and you may miss out on really good people by getting caught up in just little biases that you have, where you're like, well, they're bad at proofreading, therefore, It's not always the case. So try to be open to it, try to find some work, and be open to just meeting more people in this case. Because sometimes you'll interview people that will shock and surprise you. Next, the interview. So you've picked somebody, you've found out somebody that you want to go with. What do you do then? Well, first, you need to ask them questions to find out how they respond to negatives. And you need to ask them questions that make them think. These may seem obvious, but the way that you handle it is hugely, hugely useful. Because a lot of times you may ask, like, well, what are your greatest strengths and what are your greatest weaknesses? But there's easy answers to those. The thing you want to do is start to prod them really, really closely with questions like, what is your biggest criticism of your current portfolio? I like this one, because what it ends up doing is ask them to say something negative clearly about their work. That may seem obvious in some cases, but the fact of the matter is how they respond to that is incredibly useful for you. Because for one, if you see a piece in their portfolio and you're like, this is actually like not good work, and I can't quite tell if they know that it's good or it's bad, they may have just put it in because they felt like they needed to. This is where you can start to find that stuff out. They may say, I don't like this piece that's in the portfolio. I think it's not very good, but I kind of felt somebody told me, some teacher said I had to keep it in because I need 6 pieces in a portfolio for arbitrary reasons. At that point, you can go, okay, but what do you actually think of it? Do you not like it at all? And they're like, no, I don't like it. I actually would rather keep it out. I think this work is more conducive to what I actually want to make. And you can go, okay, see, that's how a person responds to a negative in a way that benefits you in understanding how they think. That is incredibly useful. Have you ever worked with a team on making something? Knowing how they work in a team is incredibly useful because people who have not worked in teams may not work well in teams. So knowing that they do and addressing that early on is incredibly useful, and asking questions about it as well, such as, what was that like? What did they feel about it? How did they enjoy that process? If they really enjoyed it, awesome. If they're like, well, I kind of prefer working on my own, keep that in mind. Again, that's not an X, but it informs you as to how they might react in your studio. What was your role? Perfect kind of thing, because you might find out a person was just like looking over notes on it or just play testing, and that's not what you need for your role at the moment. Good to know. What didn't work well? Again, a negative. Knowing what they didn't like about the process is hugely useful for you, because maybe they'll start saying stuff that you know you're going to be doing on your project, and you can ask them about it. What was your least favorite part? Again, I really like negatives in these cases, simply because you start to find out how they respond to troublesome parts in a process. And it can tell you whether they respond really, really well to it or less. Your portfolio has X in it, but we need you to do Y. So you have realistic stuff in your portfolio, but we need you to do cartoony stuff. Do you want to? Is a garbage question. Why? Because you're not actually finding out good information. Of course they want to. They're in an interview. They're going to say yes, because obviously you need them to, and they want a job. The question you need to ask that's more informative is, what do you like about what we're doing? Because that means they actually have to think. They really need to legitimately think, what do I like about this thing? Or lie, they will. They need to basically say, okay, here's what I like about it, here's what's interesting about that. Now, even if they lie, they may actually believe some of those things by the time they have to explain it, and making them think through it means you're getting something better out of that question. So, the problem is, you may go through this interview process, you may hire somebody who's answered everything perfectly, who has a perfect portfolio, you hire them and they suck. They're not what you wanted. It's not the end. That is just your initial employment. At this point, we need to figure out how we're going to make this work better. Because you just hired a junior now. What are you going to do? How do we make this work best? Well, the main thing is you need to remember that you are going to learn the most from teaching somebody else. That's the biggest thing that I got out of teaching, was the fact that, like, I was supposed to be teaching my students, but here's the cliche, but they were really teaching me. But it's very, very true. It's so fundamentally true. I've learned so much more by teaching than I had otherwise. And it's fantastic. But one of the things that you'll need to do when you hire that junior is you need to become a leader. Now, you may not feel comfortable with doing that. Some of you may feel that you do not have enough experience to lead somebody. But if you're hiring somebody that has less experience than you, then you can try to lead them. But you may feel resistance against that. I've felt it a million times over, all the time. I started teaching when I had barely a year of experience under my belt. I started having to tell people what to do. That's crazy. But you're going to have to. But it depends on what you think leadership is. Because we tend to misunderstand what that is and what it really entails to be a leader. We think of somebody like Steve Jobs, maybe. Somebody who's like a genius. They're a savant. They say, this is how things are going to be done, this is how we're going to do it, and when somebody does something incorrect, they're like, you stupid moron. Basically, they're the smartest. They command a room, and they give orders. They tell people what to do. But that's not necessarily always the traits of a good leader. It is a trait of narcissism, in some cases, and massive ego. And in some cases, like Steve Jobs, those traits work out well because in many cases he was a genius, but he also got fired from his own company. Those are not necessarily 100% of the times the things that you want, because those things oftentimes look like a leader, but are not. So the thing you want to think about is somebody a little bit more like Ed Catmull, who focuses very, very heavily on what it means to be a leader. Ed Catmull is the president of Pixar, has been for a very, very long time, actually forever. And he has a book, Creativity, Inc. I recommend you read it. It's very, very good. Now, again, I will point out, caveat, Ed Catmull is in the middle of some real litigation problems for some stuff, but it doesn't pertain necessarily to some of the aspects of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to just kind of shift them to the side because his other points still stand on their own, which is you want openness and candidness in your studio because that will keep you successful. A hallmark of a healthy creative culture is that its people feel free to share ideas, opinions, and criticisms. Lack of candor, if unchecked, ultimately leads to dysfunctional environments, which I've experienced 100 times over. Making sure that you create a space where people feel comfortable to say what they're thinking and feeling, whether right or wrong, is invaluable. The same kind of thing was discovered with Google's Project Aristotle, which was a project done to kind of find out how efficient teams work, how to make the team the most efficient. They looked at a million things, like what kind of composition of the team was, like experience level, and they found most of that stuff didn't matter. The openness of the team and the candidness of that team and their ability to feel psychologically safe in saying things to the team made for the most efficient teams. That's what you want with a junior. Leadership is about providing answers and listening to your team to make good ones. That is one of the hallmarks of being a good leader, is that you are paying attention to what they're saying and you're feeding it back in, even if somebody else gives you that answer, by making sure that you acknowledge it and just let that be the answer. That is leadership. So the initial employment, the things we want to focus on when they're coming on board, when you need to be a leader, is candid communication and considered work. So first, candid communication. You want people talking to you. How do you do that? Well, first off, the easiest one, one-on-ones. One-on-ones, we've had these at Ubisoft, where I was working before, and they were super, super effective and powerful. Basically, they are private, regular meetings where you talk about things that are personal or professional or whatever. The goal of it is that you basically just build openness. You talk either every week, every other week, every month with your junior, or individually with multiple people, ideally with everybody, so that you start to find out what the person's thinking. If the person's having a frustration, if they're frustrated with the work that they're doing, if they want to do something else, if they're really happy with doing a certain thing, if they're really enjoying certain parts, you having that information is fundamentally useful. Because you can go, okay, cool, like I'm gonna continue giving them this kind of work. Or if they're doing something and they're not doing a good job with it, and you go into your one-on-one, they go, oh, I feel like I'm doing a really bad job with this. Perfect. Now you know, one, that they're feeling the same way. Two, if they're willing to say that to you, that's good. Do not shut that down, because you want that openness. You want them to feel comfortable saying these things. The goal of it is not necessarily to immediately enact anything, but to talk, to find out how the people are reacting, to build that openness. One of the ways that helps doing this is by being wrong and acknowledging it early on, because you will be. You'll constantly be. Even if you're a leader, if you feel that you can't be wrong, shut up. Stop it. It's not going to help you. The fact of the matter is you'll be wrong constantly. Your job is not to be right. Remember, our job is to provide answers. I've had a situation in which when I was teaching texturing, one week specifically, I remember some students coming in and they were going, hey, they happened to mention one of the other instructors explained the same thing that I taught the previous week, but said to do it in the exact opposite way that I taught. And I was like, oh, wait, that's actually the way to do it. That's a better way. So I had to just straight up say, I'm like, don't do it my way. Last week, I was wrong. But I'd already established that I can be wrong, that I can be constantly wrong, that there are a ton of different ways to do things. I was coming at it from one perspective, but for the purposes of what we were doing, totally makes sense to do it a different way, opposite to what I was saying. That means I don't undermine myself. I don't end up in a situation in which as soon as somebody finds out a different fact, that now I have no authority. Because it doesn't matter that I need a certain amount of authority, it matters that I need to provide answers for them. I need to help push these people forward. I don't necessarily need to always be right. Because if they go, hey, I just found this new way of doing it, I don't have to start getting in my head about, well, it's not the way I said, so I'm going to be wrong. Be wrong. Be constantly wrong. Simply focus on providing answers, listen to people, and find good answers as much as you can, and revise, change, adjust. That is the way that you'll be able to really, really be able to push people forward without getting caught in your head. But sometimes somebody's going to do a bad job, and listening and being nice and supportive is not enough. You are not their mom or dad. You are their lead. Sometimes you just need to go, you suck. You're not doing a good job right now, but you suck. Not helpful. That's critical, but we need to be constructive. You need to explain why they suck. You need to basically be very clear about what is not working and provide a path for being able to stop sucking. Because when you can do that, they can see how they can adjust and fix and change what they're doing. If somebody's not showing up on time consistently, you don't go, well, you better be here. Even then, you're at least providing a path. But you want to be very clear. If somebody is producing work or saying, for example, I had somebody who was asking me way too many questions when we were working, which is a good thing, which I'll get to, but they were asking me a lot. And at some point I had to be like, you know what, for this stuff, I need you to kind of step back and not ask me any questions for this. Specifically because I want to see how you're going to handle it. That's all I need you to do, just for this one time. Because I need to be critical with them where it's like, I can't give you 100% of my time, so I need you to resolve this for yourself. A path is what is needed while making sure that you point out when things aren't working. Considered work. So considered work is your consideration to the work that you are giving somebody else. It is the task management. For this, you need to be very thoughtful about what you're giving to people. Structure and clarity is vital to this. In any of the assignments I've given or any of the projects that I've given, the best success you get from a junior is when you give very strict, clear guidelines about what a person needs to accomplish. The less you know, the less you can say what you need, the more problems, the more you increase that risk of the task that you're giving somebody. That structure and clarity is vital. I often used to tell students that they would need to give me a base texture or a base model. What's a base model? That means nothing. It's an ephemeral, impossible idea to figure out exactly what I would want. But if I get something back that wasn't what I was thinking of, who's wrong? Me. I have to take responsibility for that because I gave a task that is not very clear. If you do give a task that is unclear and unstructured, just make sure that you are aware of that. If you give an unstructured task, expect an unstructured result. And you'll be in a much better scenario for what you're going to be getting. You need to provide oversight and assistance. So for example, as I was pointing out before, I try to make sure that I always sit really close to my juniors because I want them to feel very comfortable to just kind of like swivel a seat and go, I don't know what I'm doing, I have no idea what's going on. That happens all the time. Be open to that. If somebody asks you a question and they're like, I think this is a stupid question, be very clear that it's not. If you get really caught up in what stupid questions are, you're going to get somebody who's not going to ask you anything. They're going to get very scared. They're not going to ask you questions. They're going to stumble and fumble on a task, but won't want to ask you about it because they won't want to seem stupid. But a lot of times, they just don't know, and you may not even have a good answer for it. Both of you don't know, but neither of you know that nobody knows. It's the worst. Make sure that you check with them, that you're always there for them when they need to ask something, that you help. That if you're seeing that they're doing something that makes no sense, check over, go, hey, okay, that's actually totally not the way that I want you to do it. That's not a problem. Let's adjust. Make sure there's no shame in it. Make sure that it's just, hey, you know what? I didn't make that clear before. Let's do it this way. Or you know what? I even told you to do it a different way. Remember for next time, please, but let's adjust anyways. Let's treat this like it's the first time. A lot of times. Because you're going to get more openness, more honesty with those things. Make sure it's meaningful work. There's a studio I know who mostly had their juniors do unwraps for light maps. If you don't know what that is, it is grunt work. It is not enjoyable. It's not fun. It's not really particularly productive. And their juniors would only do that. It's pretty much meaningless work. Their regular artists should be doing it, but they're not. They're just passing off the work to somebody else who will not progress. Those artists would not become better artists by simply doing that work. You do not want that. You might as well not hire a junior to do that. You should get better at doing that job, honestly. Or find a better practice for the way of doing it. But instead, when you just pass off meaningless work to somebody, nobody wins. You don't learn from it, they don't learn from it. So make sure the work has some meaning most of the time. Sometimes, grunt work, you do have to just give away. Because sometimes, you just need stuff to get done. Which brings us to whether you need results or quality. The fact of the matter is they are different. You need to task somebody appropriately. So first off, if you're looking for quality, ask for quality. The first task that I got at Ubisoft was to make a tent. Interesting, okay. How long did I have to do it? 2 weeks. Which is crazy for making just a tent. Not a texture, just a high poly and bake just for like normal maps. That was it. For 2 weeks, which is a crazy, ludicrous amount of time to make a tent. I've never had that long to make a tent or anything of that size before. And that was about like yay big for like a third-person perspective game. So like that is not a normal amount of time, but the goal was to produce a quality asset. And even when I tried to do it in 2 days, which was what I was aiming for, and I was accomplishing it, but my lead was immediately like, no, take time with it. I want to see the best tent that you can make. If it takes 2 weeks, like literally take as long as you can to do it. And so I did. I started to learn how the folds of canvas work, how that structure is actually going to feel. Like I started using some cloth physics to get the top right because it wasn't falling quite right when I sculpted it, and it created some shapes that I would not have thought of making otherwise because I would have focused on just getting it done. So focus on quality. Give time when you want to see a quality result. Don't expect the best quality when you take away time, because you're not going to get it. Especially with somebody starting out, they're going to get anxious, they're going to get nervous, they're going to make mistakes. So give them some of the time to step through those and provide the oversight in between to make sure it keeps pushing forward. If you want results, ask for results. All of this stuff was done in like a couple of days, because my goal was, I don't care how this turns out, we just need these assets in the game because we don't have them. This was all like Stinger missile and like terrorist stuff in an area that had a bunch of terrorists who were using Stinger missiles, but we had none in the level, which was crazy, and it was a narrative element that we absolutely needed. So I was just like, okay, I just need to take a couple days and just make these as quick as possible. Results were the most important. The quality of them could be whatever. As long as they were there, they were better than not there. So make sure when you're tasking somebody with results, you focus on, did they get it done when I needed it done? Because I need results. Don't get caught up in the results being quality, because you can't have that all the time. Make sure you focus on what needs to get done, and if you do need more time for quality, give that after the result has been achieved, and then focus on quality. Responsible mentorship. When somebody is underneath you and is trying to pay attention to what you're telling them to do, they will respect you a lot of times, unless you're being a real jerk. So be respectful of that. Make sure that you're giving them everything you can to make sure that you're guiding them in the right way. Don't worry about being wrong. You will be. You'll say, like, do it this way, and then you'll find out later, it was like, that was a stupid idea. Change it. Acknowledge it and go, you know what? This kind of thing happens. Making games is hard. We know making games is hard. We'll adapt. We'll adjust. Sorry, my bad. Be responsible about how you mentor that person. I've seen tons of teachers go into schools, and technology changes, technology adapts. They start to find out that the thing that they're teaching is not necessarily applicable anymore, but they won't change it. They don't want to. Bleh. That sucks. I absolutely, absolutely hate that, because that's not responsible, that you're not being responsible to the people that you are trying to educate, that you are trying to help further. When you don't do that, you are not being responsible to those who look up to you. And also, quite clearly, you do not learn anything from it. Be responsible about those things. That means questioning your sacred cows, those things that you think are super, super important, such as, loads of times, overtime, crunch. It's an easy one. It's the one that we can probably be a little bit more like, oh, you shouldn't say bad things about crunch, because we all do it. I know I do it. It is not constructive. It's not a useful thing. Statistically speaking, it's bad. It's unanimously not good and results in a number of negative things. But when you teach a junior, those brand new people coming into the industry, that this is just how it has to be done, and you don't question it, they're going to do it. And what's going to happen is we get into the stage where later on in your life, you start to maybe have a family, you start to, maybe want to like settle down, maybe not want to work like 20 hours a day, but you can't. In a number of AAA studios, they've had an atmosphere of, well, if you don't work those hours, you're fired, and we'll hire on a junior who will, and we'll teach them that this is the way that it works. And then we get into an industry where we constantly do that when it's not effective. That doesn't mean that you eliminate crunch entirely. That's like honestly not practical. For some places it is. You're always going to have a little. Or if you want to work more and produce something better, you can do that, but do not enforce it. Do not create a culture that does that. When you train your juniors to constantly do that, and when you say, hey, I need something done in a day, you know it's not practical to get it done in a day at a proper quality level, but you task it anyways because you'll know they'll stay for a super long time to finish it and to make it as good as possible, you're training that into them. You don't want to do that. Be responsible about some of those things and be cognizant of it. Be aware of what you're doing. And at least question it and adjust if you start to see when it doesn't work. Supercharging. So you've gotten to a certain point in your development now. You've had this person for long enough. You've done all those basic tasks to start building up some leadership, but what do you do to make them better than they are now? To really excel them, to supercharge them? What you want to do is start creating critical thinking in them, creating that independence for them, and retaining them. So first off, critical thinking. How do we get them thinking for themselves, not having to rely on you constantly to resolve some answers? Well, get their opinion. Ask them. If they're doing a piece of work, or you're showing a piece of your work to them, prod them directly. What do you think of this? Is this a good piece of work? What looks good about it? Does it fit the scene? Is this code structured well? Those kinds of questions means that they've got to answer it. That is the kind of thing that you want. That's like the first step, is making sure you ask them about that stuff. Get their thoughts on it. They may be wrong. In certain situations, they may say, like, whoa, it should be more blue. Be like, why? Question them. Why should it be blue? It might just be, well, I think blue's better. I think blue's better for that thing. And maybe that's a nonsense answer. It might be, you don't know unless you question further. Why do you think blue works in this case? In this case, for example, maybe blue is not part of this color palette, and you have to point out directly, we can't use blue in this case. So making it blue will not help us here. What else do you think we should do? And potentially even make those changes. Or have them make those changes, but find out their thought process on it and discuss back and forth, collaborate with them on why things shouldn't look a certain way. For example, like, hey, you know what, that's a really good point. I'm not going to change it because there's not enough time, but that's a good point, and we can keep this kind of thing in mind. And we can acknowledge we don't have time to make that kind of change, which again is a completely reasonable reason to not do something. Or doesn't fit the color palette. Your idea is not invalid, but it doesn't fit what we're trying to do right now. Get them thinking about those things and talking about them. Create a language specifically for discussing what makes sense. For example, I did a talk on specifically interior design and how it relates to environment art. The thing I loved about it was that interior designers have terminology for why things should look the certain way that they do, because they've actually literally done like scientific studies, as scientific as it can get. Because they actually need those terms because real lives would be affected by bad design. Whereas in games, it doesn't matter as much, so we don't research it, so we don't have the terms. But having those terms consistently and being able to say, well, here's what we're going to do, here's how we can do it, is super effective. It means that you can reasonably articulate what the problems are and how to resolve them. And again, you can be wrong about all of it. If you feel like, well, no, but like if we're talking about this stuff, I've got to be correct. Research, easy. All you need to do is continue looking at that stuff, continue being willing to learn and change your ideas. If they come up with a thing and you're like, oh man, they're right. They're totally right. And I actually made something that looks dumb in comparison to what they're actually talking about. Don't go, wrong, I made it, you're dumb. That's not effective. That's not helpful. That shoots them down. That devalues them, which is not what you want. You want to build them up so that they can be equal or better than you, because then you still get something out of it, you selfish person. Make sure that you have the terms to work with so that you can explain these things and what works. Creating independence, because you do not want them constantly taking your time away. At some point, you just want them to be a peer, ideally, to just be independent and just solve these problems by themselves, and you can go, good job, I taught you all that. Like, that's perfect. That's the kind of thing that you want. So, start giving them loose goals. A lot of times you may do this anyways. You may be like, I don't have time, I can't think about this, I just need you to make a waterfall. And they'll be like, I don't know how to make a waterfall. You'll be like, and that's fine. That will start to create that independence. Now, you may do it accidentally because you're just totally out of time, which is very common. Find that time as much as you can, but when you want to create that independence, accept that those loose goals are going to happen. And even if you don't really intend them to happen, be aware of the fact that you just gave a very loose goal and see how they accomplish it. Because the nice thing is when you give these loose goals, that person is going to feel some ownership. They're going to feel ownership over the work that they're doing because they're solving some problems that are new, that maybe even you know how to solve, but they don't. And they should at least be able to talk about that with you in your one-on-ones and start to say, you know, I didn't know how to solve that. And you can be like, well, I could tell you an answer, but why don't you figure it out? Because that will give them ownership over that task, over that goal. If you've got some of the space to do that, let them do it. Don't try to control all of it all the time, because then you are creating an atmosphere where they can't solve their own problems, and you now need to solve all of them. which is no fun. It is way more enjoyable, I guarantee it, when your team solves their problems themselves. Even if it's not the way that you thought you wanted it to be, when they solve it, their morale goes up, they feel a lot better about it, and they start coming up with more creative solutions to these things. And then you just need to be open and candid about whether that idea worked. And that is, maybe they'll feel really good about it, but the idea totally fell flat, and at least you discuss it. You talk about what didn't work and what worked. Because they need the freedom to fail. The fact of the matter is if they do something, they take ownership of it, and they screw it up completely. Maybe they don't finish it. Maybe now you have to come on and you actually have to fix it. You've wasted a bunch of time. You've lost a bunch of stuff. That is an opportunity to learn for both of you, for all of you. What you don't want to do is suddenly just go, well, maybe we should just fire you. No, because that's not really an opportunity to fail. That's not an opportunity to learn. That's an opportunity to penalize and punish. That's not what you want. That's not going to give them the space to feel comfortable trying to address something else. Because what will happen next time is they'll go, well, I screwed that up. Clearly, the only thing that I can do is constantly ask them questions forever or just fail again, which means you're back in that same cycle again. Give them the space to fail. Pixar artists, they fail all the time. Creativity Inc. specifically talks about where they had 3 movies in a row that were total garbage or just not nearly as good as a Pixar movie should be, like Cars 2 and all that kind of stuff. Those movies didn't pan out, and they're aware of it, and they take that as a chance to go, okay, like what actually didn't work here, without just going, well, the people that were on that project can go look out. Instead, they learn from it. They adjust. They adapt. Retaining people. The fact of the matter is you do not want a situation in which you hire somebody on and you're really excited, and you teach them a bunch of stuff, and they've become really good, and then they see somewhere better, and they leave. That sucks. I know a number of people who are always scared of hiring juniors because they're like, I'm just going to train them and then they're going to leave. But how do you keep them? Well, basically, work-life balance. It's one of the easiest ones. It's one of the most notable ones. Most time, people do not leave a studio to have a worse work-life balance. On average, that's generally the situation. They won't go, oh man, I really like having spare time, but that place I could work all day and night and weekends. That usually doesn't happen. That's not what people usually say. You may feel differently, like you go to Naughty Dog and you can go do that, but they do. But that's not the usual thing. So having a reasonable work-life balance for that person really helps keep that retention up. I've known tons of people who've left studios because they're just like, I just can't work these hours. I need to slow down. So, easy one, find a better balance for that stuff. It's better for you, it's better for them. They will learn more in their spare time by being able to do other things and experience life a bit more by having a better work-life balance. It's better for you in general. Impact. Make sure that they have impact in the work that they do, or that they can see that impact, and they're going to want to be able to stay. For example, if you've just got people making UV2s, the unwraps for lights, that's not going to be very impactful. They're not going to feel like they have any stake in this whatsoever, and they'll want to go to do something where they can actually have impact in the work and the studio. Make sure that they have impact, and they're much more likely to stay. Make sure that they have goals, and that you're fulfilling them in some way, ideally. In their one-on-ones, talk about what their goals are going forward. Make sure you're looking ahead so that you can be aware of what they want to achieve and how you can help them achieve it. That will help keep a person in the studio because they can see how they can grow. Maybe you can't meet those needs. Maybe they say, I want to be a programmer, and you're like, oh, you don't know anything about programming. You're an artist. I can't help you because we just don't have time. At least you'll be prepared when they leave for a programming job. That's helpful too. And meaning. Meaning is one of the hardest ones because the fact of the matter is for somebody to find meaning in the work that they do, sometimes you can't help. In certain cases, if an artist working on Splinter Cell, he left because he did not like the torture sequences that were in that game, especially early on when they were more. He was just like, this is not right for me. I cannot derive meaning from working on a game like this. I have to go. And sometimes you just can't control that stuff. Sometimes you can't change those things or give meaning to somebody. But being aware of it, again, talking about it, can help you start to discuss with them what meaning they can find in the work that they're doing. And that is, again, hugely useful. As well, you know what? What about you? The fact of the matter is if they leave the studio, did you just lose all that work? You just trained them up, you just made them so smart, and they just left for somewhere else? you didn't actually necessarily lose what you think you lost. Because every time you're training somebody up, unless you've done this a million times, you're learning something at the same time. You are becoming a better developer by teaching somebody else. So what you've lost is only some of that manual labor, some of that education that you gave, which you'll have to give to somebody else now. But each time is progressive. You learn more each time. So you don't lose what you thought you did. So in summary, you want to find the right person to work at your studio to be the right junior for you. And you want to ask them in the interview thought-provoking questions to find out more about who they are. You want to become a considerate leader and mentor to them. And open up and be wrong so that they can do the same. But be thoughtful and provide answers and learn from them. Then push them further, give them respect and ownership in what they're doing, and watch as they begin to lead others. Because when you strengthen those who look up to you, you strengthen yourself. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. As a fellow teacher, I sometimes struggle with students believing that they are done with a task with plenty time left. So my question is this. Do you have any tips on how to inspire the students to spend the time allotted to make the best possible product instead of quitting halfway thinking their work is done?
Provide examples as much as possible. When they can see what they could accomplish, they're much more likely to want to try to replicate that. On average, I would say if you're working with a good person, a person who's excited and motivated, when they see good quality work, they're gonna wanna do the same thing. Now, if the person doesn't feel that way, and it's a person who's like, you've shown them amazing work, and they only ever do half of what they should, and the results are always half there, that's a hard one to teach. You basically have to handle it entirely differently. If you've got somebody like that who comes in, and you give them like, hey, you've got a day to finish this task, and they spend like half the day, and they go, there it is, it's done. That's a hard one. That is one of the most difficult things to do, because that is a fundamental difference in how that person perceives good work. At that point, you need to build up from a very low base, and you need to explain to them what good work looks like and try to get them excited about good quality work, not just results. At that time, it's probably good to ask for a quality project, a quality task where you've got a fair bit of time and you want to show this is the quality you need to hit. And every time they give you something that's less than that, you go, okay, well, I need you to push this further. I need you to go further. Here's where you can go to go further. Give them that path. But then show that they need to hit that spot and show them the exact kind of work that you want to see as often as you can. Show them the best work. And a lot of people are going to get excited about that and excited about becoming better. But as much as possible, try to show that.
Anyone up there?
I think I see another question over at the left. Yeah.
Would you?
Oh, is somebody upstairs too? I can't see. Did somebody have a question up there as well?
Yes, hello.
Oh, there's a mic up there. Okay, we'll come back to you.
First want to say it was a very inspiring speech. Now I actually feel a hope for some time getting to fulfill the dream of being working with games.
Yeah?
I just wondered if you had any tips for us who are maybe someday going to be a junior and how we can show better what we can do to better appeal to those looking for juniors.
The easiest way is I can't see you now, but I kind of couldn't before. Always make art, always make programming. That phrase is weird, but keep making is really the only easy way. It's also the most time consuming, but it is also the surefire way of getting better, is never stop, never stopping. You always have to make, you always have to create, and make sure that you're always looking to the people that are doing much better than you and try to ask them questions. I've had my students actually go through a task of like literally pick out the people that they love the most in the industry, write their names down, and then I literally force them to email them. To just send a completely unsolicited email to, like, even if it's like Shigeru Miyamoto, doesn't matter. Send that email, try to find their email address, send a heartfelt, meaningful email to that person. Not just, I like you, that's not good. That's not a helpful question. That's not even a question. You will get no response. Your goal is to try to establish a relationship with that person in a meaningful way. Talk to them. Try to learn from them if you can. Because a lot of times, a lot of developers actually do want to give something back. A lot of times they're scared to do that. They'll feel that they're wrong. And that's fine. As I pointed out, it's fine to be wrong. What you want to do is make sure that you contact and talk to those people who are doing better than you. It may be scary. Just get out of your head about it and do it. And make. If you've finished school and you're like, I'm so tired, take a break and then make more stuff. You are going to make better stuff when you're focused on a task and when you make complete work. If you're constantly doing sketches or doing like halfway finished models, stop that. Make a project short-term. Short-term goals are vital. Make sure you do small projects and complete them, beginning to end. Whatever that project is, keep it small and finish it. Both of those things, repeat it over and over and over again, and you'll have a built-up portfolio of good quality work. And there you go, you get a job. Over time, it'll happen. You just have to keep making it. One of my students who was a great artist took 3 years before he got a job, like a proper job. It was at Ubisoft, thankfully, so he got a big confidence boost, but it took a long time for it to happen, and there was really no reason why it should have. He was a really good artist, but the timing just didn't work out for him, and just opportunities didn't come up. Sometimes it can take time, but if you constantly produce, it will happen. It's just demoralizing a little bit. And there was another question there.
Yeah, I was wondering, because you've been working at both small and large studios, right?
Yep.
And could you say, like, is your experience hiring people at a large studio different than it is, for example, you're working at Capybara now, and it's a much smaller studio than some of the other places you've been working.
Yeah.
And is there, like, because in Norway and Scandinavia, I think in general, the studios tend to be a lot smaller.
Yep.
So I'd like to hear your perspective on.
So when you're trying to when trying to hire people at a small studio, it's always harder to especially find applicants, and a lot of that really is easily solvable. Go to studios, do outreach, reach out to the communities that want to work for you, and you'll get that back in turn. They'll want to work for you because they'll be aware of you, which is hugely useful. And schools are super useful for that. The fact of the matter is we had loads of students who were really good, and just people were not aware of it. So make sure that you do some outreach to try to get in touch with them and sit down with some of those basic interview questions. Write down your interview questions beforehand as well is hugely useful because you can think of really smart ones, write them down, or you will forget them in the process of trying to actually talk to somebody. I do it all the time, but when I write them down, it's always much better. When you're hiring for somebody at like Ubisoft, where there's like, when I was there, 300 people, there's like 400 people now. It's a lot of people. You are often like loosely involved in the process of hiring people, but they get tons of applicants, which means you get to pick from the best ones and like say no to people who are actually really good, which is crazy because you just want to hire them all, but you can't. For a small studio, just really try to do outreach to make sure people are aware of you, and you'll get the better applicants. Do we have time for one more?
I think we have to stop there.
No, that's fine. That's
yeah.
okay. We can talk afterwards. If you guys have any other questions, please do feel free to ask me at any time if you see me around. It's kind of what I'm around for. So, yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks.